she looked at me, I knew I wasn't done yet. We boarded.
Titanic 2 is an upcoming American romantic drama and historical epic, serving as a sequel to James Cameron's 1997 blockbuster Titanic. Directed by James Cameron, the film is set for release in late 2025 and stars Leonardo DiCaprio reprising his role as Jack Dawson and Kate Winslet as Rose DeWitt Bukater. Set years after the tragic sinking of the RMS Titanic, the sequel explores an alternate history where Jack survived and reunites with Rose as they confront new challenges tied to the discovery of a modern-day Titanic Roman II, a luxury ship retracing the original voyage. With sweeping visuals, emotional storytelling, and a powerful new soundtrack, Titanic 2 promises to deliver both nostalgia and fresh drama, rekindling one of cinema's most beloved love stories while introducing a new generation of characters and dangers on the open sea. I'm not sure if this revelation is going to be a surprise or not, but I love Titanic. It is the only chick flick that I can sit through without feeling sick, and there are several totally believable reasons for that. Whenever I say to someone that I love Titanic, I watch their eyes roll around in their head and listen to the response, "Well, you would, wouldn't you?" Yes, it's true. I'm a girl and I do love Titanic, but I don't just love it for the love story that's packed into every film by law. Normally, a love interest plot is there either as some kind of ultimate goal or something for the girls, whilst the boys enjoy the juicy action. But in this case, the whole story is a love story when a bloody great big ship isn't sinking. Anyone reading this will know the plot, but let's have a brief rundown anyway. Initially taking place in 1996, Brock Lovett, the late Bill Paxton, dives down to the wreck of the Titanic. He searches through the wreck to find a safe which he believes contains a valuable necklace. Having brought it to the surface, the safe doesn't contain the necklace but some rotted papers and a drawing of a nude lady wearing the necklace. The lady in the picture, 100-year-old Rose Dawson Calvert, Gloria Stewart, gets in contact with Lovett and convinces him that she was on the Titanic the night that it sank. Having been brought on board the Russian research vessel Keldysh with her granddaughter, Lizzie Susie Ames, she proceeds to tell her story, which consists of love, loss, heartbreak, and ultimately, disaster. What's clear right from the get-go is that this is a character-driven film. It centers around Rose and the story of her journey on the Titanic, which is told through flashbacks to 1912. Of course, Dawson Calvert is not her real name. The flashbacks that take us to 1912 feature a 17-year-old Rose DeWitt Bukater, Kate Winslet, as she boards the Titanic in Southampton with her mother, Ruth Frances Fisher, and her 30-year-old fiancé, Cal Hockley, Billy Zane. Rose has been forced into this engagement by her mother, as marrying such a rich man will keep her debt-ridden family in finery for years to come. Rose's life is very much controlled, and she's desperate to break free. Her desperation leads her to attempt to throw herself off the back of the ship, but she is saved at the last minute by a very special young man, Jack Dawson, Leonardo DiCaprio. Having won his ticket to the Titanic in a poker game, Jack boards with his friend, Fabrizio Danny Nucci, with the hopes of going back home to America. Jack is an artist who uses his talent to make a bit of money and keeps moving around, never staying in one place for too long. When he meets Rose, he becomes infatuated with her. Love at first sight, I believe, is the term. Just as Rose starts getting into Jack as well, her mother steps in to put a stop to it by any means necessary. Obviously, at the start of any film, the main characters are a mystery, but as Titanic progresses, the audiences begin to see much more of Rose in more ways than one. than the uptight, spoiled, rich girl that she's initially is portrayed to be, and that's after meeting Jack. Because Cal believes that Jack saved Rose from falling over the edge of the ship, Jack is invited to a first-class dinner. In return, Jack takes Rose down into the lower decks of the ship to show her how the third-class passengers throw a party. Rose begins to show her true colors, and she's actually having fun with the dancing and the smoking and the drinking. But all this fun comes at a price via an intense encounter with Cal and a roasting by her mother. There's an interesting scene around midway through the film where Rose is having lunch with her mother, and she looks over to see a little girl all dressed up having tea with her own mother. Rose watches the little girl delicately place a napkin on her lap, and her mother adjust her posture. Rose realizes that this is her life, rigorously controlled, and goes to find Jack. This leads to the popular "I'm flying" scene where Jack and Rose have their first kiss on the bow of the ship. It was also featured on the movie poster. Put simply, Jack represents everything that Rose wants to be. He's a free spirit, not bound by any regulations or rules of conformity. He lives his life his own way, and it's also a double-edged sword because being with Jack is seen as an act of rebellion by Rose's mother. When Rose and Jack get to know each other a little better, Rose opens up a little bit more, or a lot more, depending on how you see it. Aside from the actual sinking, this is probably the most famous scene in the film and one of the first to be shot, as the majority of the sets weren't yet built. This scene depicts Jack sketching a nude Rose wearing the heart of the ocean, the necklace that Lovett is after. Altogether, it's a rather cute sequence as Rose teases Jack whilst he's drawing her, but if you catch Rose at just the right moment, there's a shot of her looking at Jack, and the merest hint of a smile comes onto her face as if this is a moment she has waited for all her life, to be free. It becomes additionally powerful thanks to a slower rendition of the late James Horner's magnificent score, which I'll go into in more detail later on. Those with a keen eye will notice that the hands sketching Rose are not Leonardo DiCaprio's hands, but the hands of James Cameron, who is himself an artist, and still has the original drawing. It should also be noted that Cameron is left-handed, and DiCaprio is right-handed, so to achieve the illusion that it's actually DiCaprio sketching the picture, Cameron drew with his left hand, and then flipped the shot in post-production to make it look like DiCaprio drawing with his right hand. Titanic does draw heavily on emotion and has some really beautiful and tear-jerking sequences such as the kiss on the bow. But along with the beauty comes the heartbreak. I would say the most heartbreaking sequence in the film comes after the Titanic has sank and Rose is floating on a piece of wood whilst Jack hangs on to the side. In the distance, Fifth Officer Harold Lowe Ione Gruffud is leading a lifeboat back to the site to rescue any survivors. Rose sees the boat and tries to rouse Jack to tell him they are about to be rescued. But sadly, Jack has already succumbed to hypothermia. Rose is forced to let Jack's body sink into the ocean so she can attract the attention of the boat, keeping her promise that she would go on. Go on, get it, anyway. This sequence led audiences to ask the question, why did Jack have to die? This question went so far as to appear on the hit US show Mythbusters, in which the presenters proved that if Jack had secured a life preserver to the bottom of the piece of wood, it would have provided enough stability for both Jack and Rose to stay afloat. Cameron's response to these findings was that Jack's death was written in the script, and therefore it had to happen. He also acknowledged that maybe they should have used a smaller piece of wood. Fair enough. The main totally believable reason as to why I love Titanic is that I know how it was made, and if you go into it, it's truly amazing. James Cameron is a notable explorer and has dove down to the wreck of the Titanic on numerous occasions, but his first time was in 1995, 1 year after the release of True Lies starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis. Cameron desperately wanted to shoot footage of the wreck, not such a huge feat since such footage has been filmed before. Cameron wanted the camera to be on the outside of the submersible to get uninterrupted shots of the wreck. But there was one problem. The wreck of the Titanic lies 12,000 ft below the waterline on the ocean bed, and the pressure that far down is equal to 6,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush pretty much anything. In the mid-90s, a camera did not exist that could cope with such conditions, so James Cameron's brother, Mike Cameron and Panavision created such a camera. This kind of equipment came with limitations. Whilst the camera would be able to film on the ocean floor, it could only carry 12 minutes of film and could not be reloaded underwater for obvious reasons. As a result, a model of the Titanic wreck was made along with two tiny model submersibles to represent the submersibles that would go down on the chute. Together with his crew and fellow sailors, Cameron planned each and every shot that would end up in the movie. Altogether, Cameron and his team dove down to the wreck an astonishing 12 times to complete the shots, with each trip taking around 16 hours from dive to resurface. Originally, the dives were only meant to film the exteriors of the wreck, but sometime into the project, Cameron changed tack and sent down an ROV, which I can only imagine stands for Remote Operated Vehicle, which was only meant to be used as a prop for the movie, but was fully functioning. The ROV had a camera on it and could squeeze through the open spaces and into the ship, a feat that had been successfully attempted before by the man who initially discovered the wreck in 1985, professor of oceanography and retired United States Navy officer, Robert Ballard. On Cameron's dive, the pictures from inside the Titanic provided significant reference for the details of the ship's interior that photographs could not give. These details would be critical in the creation of the sets. One centerpiece of the film and on the actual ship was the grand staircase, which was the main point of passage for the first-class passengers. The staircase was completely destroyed during the sinking and was ripped away from the foundations, leaving a gaping hole. This hole provided access to each deck for the ROV and for the smaller boats that would be used on future dives. With significant reference, what came next was the building of the sets. All of the interior sets used for the film, such as Rose and Cal's first-class suite, were built on a film set, but Cameron went one step further and built a near-enough full-scale replica of the Titanic herself on the coast of Baja, Mexico, using the original Harland and Wolff blueprints, including the 465 FT funnels. The set of the Titanic ship was built on hydraulic lifts, as the replica would be used to film the sinking, and would need to be lowered in and out of the water as needed. The stern, the back of the ship, would also need to be raised to a vertical position to achieve the look of the final moments of the Titanic. Two primary tanks were used for the filming of the significant moments on the ship's deck and the sinking itself. The replica of the Titanic was built in a horizon tank on the coast and was filled with 17 million gallons of water. A second tank was commissioned, holding 5 million gallons of water, which held various sets that would need to be flooded on camera, including the grand staircase. 90,000 gallons of water was used for the sequence in which the grand staircase is destroyed by the torrent of water that bursts through the glass dome above. Even though the staircase was fixed to steel-reinforced foundations, the force of the water ripped the solid oak staircase away from the set. On top of that, a third tank consisting of 350,000 gallons of water was used for the post-sinking scenes. The most critical point in the sinking is the moment where the Titanic breaks in two. The set of the ship was already built on a tilting platform and hydraulic lifts. As the bow front of the ship was lowered into the tank, extras portraying the passengers were required to run to the stern that was being lifted to a near-vertical position. Stunt performers then were scripted to tumble down the decks as the stern was being lifted, hitting railings and some jumping over the side. After a number of minor injuries, the stunts were called to a halt and CG people were used for the more dangerous stunts. Another aspect of the film that I totally respect is the level of historical accuracy, not only from the recreation of the ship and its interiors, but also in the characters. Jack and Rose are entirely fictional, but a number of the other characters were real passengers and crew members on the Titanic. Most notable include Kathy Bates as the infamous unsinkable Molly Brown, Eric Breeden as John Jacob Astor Roman IV, the richest man aboard the Titanic, Bernard Fox as Colonel Archibald Gracie Roman IV, Michael Ensign as Benjamin Guggenheim and his young mistress, Madame Aubert played by Fanny Brett and Lou Poulter, and Elsa Raven as Isidore and Ida Strauss. Isidore Strauss was the former owner of RH. Macy and Company, or Macy's as it's known. Of course, the Titanic wouldn't have existed or gone anywhere without the designers and the crew of the luxury liner. Victor Garber played Thomas Andrews, the Irishman who designed the Titanic and sailed with her on her maiden voyage. As his creation was sinking into the North Atlantic, Mr. Andrews was last seen in the smoking room, dumbstruck that his unsinkable ship was doomed. Jonathan Hyde plays Jay. Bruce Ismay, managing director at White Star Line, the British shipping company that owned the Titanic. It is generally thought and portrayed in the film that Mr. Ismay convinced Captain Edward Smith to increase the speed of the Titanic in order to arrive in New York early and gain some positive press. Although it was portrayed this way in the movie, inquirers into the sinking would argue that the conversation between Ismay and Captain Edwards never took place. After the collision with the iceberg, Thomas Andrews and Captain Edwards stayed behind, but Mr. Ismay boarded a lifeboat and survived the disaster. In the years afterwards, Ismay was accused of abandoning the Titanic whilst other passengers were still on board. Although inquiries and reputable testimonies denounced these allegations by bringing forward evidence that Ismay assisted numerous passengers onto lifeboats before boarding the final lifeboat off the starboard side. Ismay's reputation never recovered. Then, of course, there's the captain of the Titanic. Bernard Hill played Captain Edward John Smith in the movie. Captain Smith was a well-respected, decorated officer who served as master of numerous White Star Line vessels before taking command on the Titanic. At the age of 62, at the time of the maiden voyage, Captain Smith had planned for the Titanic to be his final command before retiring. In the movie, Captain Smith's final moments show him walking into the wheelhouse as it's being submerged just for the glass to break, and he is engulfed in water. This is the most recognizable version of events, but there are conflicting accounts as to how Captain Smith perished. Some accounts have him jumping from the stern of the ship. Others have him in the water after the Titanic had sank, and there is even an unconfirmed account of him committing suicide by shooting himself. Needless to say, no matter the manner in which he passed, Captain Smith never left the Titanic whilst his passengers were still on board. The captain stayed with his ship to the very last second. Arguably, the most controversial portrayal of a character in the movie was that of First Officer William Murdoch, played by Ewan Stewart. It was shown in the movie that when frightened passengers attempted to rush the remaining lifeboats, Murdoch drew his weapon in an attempt to hold them back. After shooting an unknown man and third-class passenger, Tommy Ryan, Jason Barry, Murdoch gives one final salute and then shoots himself in the head. In reality, the true cause of Murdoch's fate is unknown. There are reports of an officer shooting two men and possibly then himself, but the officer's identity was not confirmed. Murdoch's depiction in the movie was disputed. The sections called into question were the acceptance of a bribe by Cal Hockley and the scene mentioned above. In response to the complaints, Cameron issued a public apology. Cameron's level of historical accuracy went deeper than the events of the sinking and the appearance of historically significant characters. Some of the sequences throughout the film were actually what happened on the journey, such as the hymn that was sang at the church service and the ship's priest leading desperate prayer as the Titanic was going under. The accuracy went even deeper than that. Rounded up, Titanic has a running time of 3 hours and 15 minutes, but when counted together, all the scenes in 1912 add up to 2 hours and 40 minutes, the amount of time taken for the Titanic to sink. In 2012, James Cameron appeared in a documentary for National Geographic entitled Titanic, the final word, in which he gathered a team which ranged from artists to historians to naval engineers to once and for all come up with a perfect digital recreation of how Titanic sank. It's a fascinating documentary, and I would strongly suggest that anyone reading this look it up and give it a watch, because Mr. Cameron goes through where his $200 million movie may have got things ever so slightly wrong. Not massively wrong, but a bit wrong. Seriously, give it a watch. Bear in mind that Cameron's recreation was based upon all the evidence that was best known in 1995. Titanic was considered in itself to be a huge success, but in the 20 years since the film's release, one aspect of the film has taken on a life of its own. That aspect is the spectacular soundtrack that was composed, orchestrated and conducted by the late James Horner, who passed away in 2015. The female voice heard through the movie is that of Norwegian singer Sissel Kyrkjebø. But what gained the most adoration from the fans was the song played over the end credits. My Heart Will Go On was composed by James Horner, lyrics by Will Jennings, and performed by the sensational Celine Dion. Initially, Cameron didn't want a song with lyrics for the film, so Mr. Horner secretly wrote the song and privately approached Celine Dion and her late husband/manager, René Angelil. Mtks Dion was initially apprehensive about performing the song but agreed to record a demo. Horner took the demo and presented it to Cameron, officially changing his mind. What's interesting is that a demo is exactly that, a demo. A test to see if the song works, if anything needs to be added, taken away, or changed in any general way. Not in this case. The demo that Celine Dion recorded was the track used at the end of the film. The song has been re-recorded since then and performed several times, but that original track holds a simplicity that promotes Mtks Dion's voice, which is what I want to hear the most when I listen to that song. Although the re-recorded version has more of an impact, so to sum up, both versions have their own appeal to me. After the release of the movie and the single, My Heart Will Go On became the best-selling single of 1998, one of the best-selling singles of all time, and gained numerous notable accolades. Since the 1997 release of Titanic, the film did return in 2012 in 3D to commemorate the 100-year anniversary of the tragedy. Fans also flocked to Titanic Live, where the film was played along with a 130-piece orchestra, which performed James Horner's legendary score. At time of writing, to mark the 20th anniversary of the release of Titanic, the film will be re-released in cinemas again in both 2D and 3D for 1 week, starting on December 1st, 2017. With an initial budget of $125 million, problems during Titanic's production meant that the budget met, or even exceeded, $200 million. Nevertheless, when released on December 19, 1997 in the United States, Titanic made an unbelievable $1.84 billion worldwide, making it the first film to ever pass the $1 billion mark. Titanic held this record for 12 years, until it was beaten by James Cameron's Avatar in 2010. When Titanic was re-released in 2012, the film gained an additional revenue of $343.6 million worldwide, making a grand total of $2.18 billion. This figure makes Titanic the second film to ever reach the $2 billion mark after Avatar. On top of being one of the most successful films financially, Titanic also had the honor of being complimented by its peers at the 1998 Academy Awards. Just at the Academy Awards alone, Titanic won 11 Oscars out of the 14 nominations. Kate Winslet received a nomination for Best Actress. Tina Earnshaw, Greg Canham, and Simon Thompson were nominated for Best Makeup, but sadly did not win. The list of wins include Peter Lamont and Michael D. Ford for Best Art Direction, Russell Carpenter for Best Cinematography, Deborah Lynn Scott for Best Costume Design, Conrad Buff and Richard A. Harris for Best Film Editing, Gary Ridstrom, Tom Johnson, Gary Summers and Mark Ulano for Best Sound, Tom Belfort and Christopher Boyes for Best Sound Effects Editing, and Robert Legato, Mark A. Lassoff, Thomas L. Fisher and Michael Canfer for Best Visual Effects. When the great ship nears its end, in the extraordinary final scenes of James Cameron's Titanic, the dining room string quartet, out on the deck in their gray overcoats, strike up a tune called Orpheus. It is one of a number of poignant details, historically verified and dramatically vivid, the captain caressing the wheel as waters engulf him, the ship's designer also allowing himself to be washed away with his dream, the body of a girl in evening dress floating through the staterooms like a drowned Ophelia. The music's title is fitting too for a movie that is, in a sense, about the underworld, about a buried ship and buried history, and feelings that lie fathoms deep. Cameron's Titanic is the most expensive movie ever made. On an epic scale, and 3 hours and 14 minutes long, it is as large and lavish as its doomed subject. US distributors printed the running time as 2 hours and 74 minutes, to kid cinemas into not thinking that they had a 3-hour movie to sell. After a journey that had often been accompanied by a flotilla of ugly rumors, the film finally docked in London on Tuesday at a royal film performance in front of Prince Charles and received a deservedly rapturous reception. For Cameron, cheered out of the cinema, it was a personal triumph. He wrote, directed, co-produced, and co-edited the film. There was even talk of him writing an accompanying novel and documentary, but he dropped those slacker. Cameron's script is what will most startle cinema goers used to his hits such as the Terminator films and Aliens, where the dialogue usually consists of lines like "nuke the site from orbit." Titanic is, at heart, a tender love story, wound round the tragedy of the sinking ship. Through the memories of an ancient survivor, which bookend the film, Cameron takes us into the romance between Rose, Kate Winslet, an American girl traveling to America to marry her hateful but loaded fiancé, Billy Zane, and a young man, Jack Leonardo DiCaprio, who has slipped onto the boat in steerage. Credit: 20th Century Fox in Winslet and DiCaprio. Cameron has the two most captivating young performers around, and they deliver knockout performances, giving the film a magical momentum. With her haughty, troubled look, Winslet's Rose chafes against the restrictions of her class and sex from the start, while DiCaprio's Jack is the embodiment of impish freedom. The scene where the two dance jigs at a lower deck party is close to pure joy. Cameron's portrayal of the rich as selfish and venal is crude, but in the grace of his two lead characters, he endorses an aristocracy of the spirit. Oddly, despite its blockbuster livery, Titanic is most successful as a comedy of manners. When the ship goes down, it is almost a disappointment, and you could argue that Cameron, determined to record the full agonizing duration of the demise, overextends these sequences. But that would be harsh on scenes of a graphic force rarely matched. From the outset, Cameron shows the ship in all its finery and vastness, yet also vulnerability. There are heart-rending sights: an old couple clinging together on their bed, a mother comforting her children with a final story. But it is a sound that lingers most, the cries of the drowning, the sort of wail you imagine rising off the sticks. It is too early to judge Titanic fully. It won't be released here until January. But what impresses most at first sight is its melding of old-fashioned, rollicking adventure and romance with more serious concerns. The movie is a ride, and not without the odd moment of corniness. But it's also about freedom and flight, bondage and stagnation. And most fittingly, as a memorial itself, it's about memory and the act of remembering. When Titanic was finally played to the top brass of 20th Century Fox, the company which largely financed the film, many of the senior executives openly wept. The film is indeed moving, but the feeling is that the tears were mainly of relief. The most expensive film in movie history had become a nightmare of overrun budgets, frayed tempers, and lurid headlines. In the public's eyes, thanks to a wholly ignorant media, the movie was close to being written off as a disaster, as another Waterworld. Before that private screening on October 31, Fox didn't know what, if anything, it would get for its investment, whether Cameron would be bringing it a trick or a treat. To get an idea of the scale of the production, it's necessary to play the numbers game. The budget is estimated at anything from $200 million upwards. Some say $280 million, and counting. Interest on overruns alone, after the US release date was postponed from July to December, is said to have amounted to $10 million. All this paid for, among other things, a tank containing 17 million gallons of water, in which to float a 775 ft, 90% scale replica ship. In addition to this, the film's 400 special effects shots cost $110 million. The film needs to earn $400 million worldwide to make a profit. Even these frightening figures do not tell the full story of the grueling Titanic shoot. There were accidents, though no more serious than to be expected on a project of this magnitude, we're assured. Tales of extras coming close to hypothermia from staying in the water, reports of rifts. And then, there was the strange affair of the spiked lobster chowder. in which the cast and crew's grub was said to have been laced with a hallucinogenic called PCP, leaving many of them reeling with psychedelic visions. Credit 20th Century Fox. Some say, though, that working for Jim Cameron has that insanity simulating effect anyway. It was his obsessive vision that drove the project from the start. Filmmaking is war, a battle between business and aesthetics, Cameron, who sometimes seems to have missed his destiny as a field marshal, has said, and he fought every inch of the way for his film. When a senior Fox executive flew to the set in Mexico to seek cutbacks on the project, Cameron told him, "If you want to cut my film, you'll have to fire me." And he added, showing that his flair for melodrama doesn't confine itself to film, "To fire me, you'll have to kill me." It may be an irony that a film about a somber symbol of human complacency was made by a man not renowned for humility. But if genius, as Samuel Butler suggested, is a supreme capacity for taking trouble, Cameron is some kind of genius. Titanic is a monument to taking pains, perhaps unparalleled in movies. Moved by a fealty to the dead, awakened, he says, by trips to the buried wreck, Cameron pledged to get the movie as accurate as humanly possible. The replica of the ship was built from the blueprints of the original, released for the first time by Harland and Wolff, Belfast.